You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property under laws they had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Inslee.
This is episode 382 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. On today's show, I'm talking about the House passing an anti-BDS bill, the impact of U.S. sanctions on Iranians, and the humanitarian catastrophe in Libya resulting from the U.S. war there. Please take the time to share the show or recommend it to a friend. Best place to find the show online is at the Libertarian Institute. The way you help the show to grow, people, is by going to the Libertarian Institute, finding the show or my daily news roundup in the right-hand column there, and then clicking the share button or saying to somebody, hey, you should really check this out to keep up on foreign policy news. If you're one of the new listeners to the show, make sure you subscribe to it somewhere. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio. The show should be up anywhere people listen to podcasts. Subscribing to the show, make sure you don't miss an episode, and I update current events on the show, and that's the way you get the most out of it. Last plug here at the start is that if you really want to help the show, think about donating and giving some financial support at patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. $5 a month there will get you in on the live stream. All right, so the first up here is the House passing this anti-boycott, divestment, and sanctions bill. I guess to go ahead and talk about BDS real quick on the start, I obviously, as an ANCAP libertarian, am not a real fan of sanctioning anyone, but especially, the boycott and divestments, I absolutely support. And rather than sanctions, maybe focusing on just all the support the U.S. government gives the Israeli government, like the, different types of military and financial aid. We're talking about here a country like Israel that is actually fairly socialist, free healthcare, I believe free college education, free abortions. And yet you have a whole bunch of people in the United States who, based on their Christian religious beliefs, certainly want to support government funding abortion, but are oftentimes also very just kind of anti-government run social welfare programs. And yet, they're fine with all their tax dollars going to Israel to support that. So I always find that very interesting. And I guess, that's just kind of my personal preferences when it comes to BDS, which is boycott, divestment, and cut the aid. Now, from what I understand and what I've been able to kind of look at in this anti-BDS bill that the House passed is that it had a lot of support, bipartisan, and it had most of the teeth stripped out of this bill. So I don't think this is as terrible as if, Marco Rubio's Senate anti-BDS bill that I think that was from the beginning of this year, had gotten passed, and that was much more destructive. But from what I'm understanding, this bill will just kind of allow the states to discriminate a little bit more against people that support the BDS movement. Famous cases like this speech pathologist in Texas who I believe was only like one of the Arabic speaking speech pathologists there, lost a contract with the school district because of her support for BDS. And so with this bill, if I, go on Facebook later today and I say boycott, divest, and sanction Israel, I don't think the police are going to show up at my door and arrest me. I don't think that, anybody's going to force me to take down the post. Now, Facebook may suppress it, but that's kind of a different thing. But at the same time, I suppose, if we keep taking steps down this road, it could be something that my employer uses to take my job and my livelihood away. And so it's not something that's without threat. One of the other problems with this bill is it kind of adds to the narrative that BDS is some kind of anti-Semitic, Jew-hating, Nazi-ish movement, which it's absolutely not. Frequent listeners to the show will remember back to the last time I had Scott Horton on. Now, I'll go ahead and link to this episode in the show notes pages because it's one of my favorites. But he goes through and details the crimes that the Israelis are committing against the Palestinians. And, once you hear that, you say to yourself, well, there's a lot of reasons not to support the Israeli government and not to want your tax dollars to. To say to yourself that, hey, if this, certain product is produced in an Israeli settlement and that was likely taken by force from some Palestinian family who had lived there for decades and decades, and, by property rights, what I believe in as a libertarian, that property should have been theirs and that no government had the right to take it. Yeah, I absolutely do not support that. And that's the problem I have with Israel, not that it has proclaimed itself to be a Jewish nation state. When, we talk about Israel on this show, a lot of times it's important to remember that I'm not talking, about just some individual citizen of Israel, but rather, the government in place there, particularly Bibi Netanyahu. It's like if I say that the American government or the U.S. government is committing war crimes in Afghanistan, I'm basically talking about, Donald Trump and Mark Esper, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, Bush, Rumsfeld, Cheney, Clinton. I could keep going back, but you kind of get what I'm saying here, that we're talking about the leadership of the country. I'm not talking about, the race, the ethnicity, the religion of whatever the leadership is. Just the fact that the U.S. government and the Israeli government are extremely hawkish, some of the most hawkish militaries on the planet, and in a large part because of the way, U.S. discourse and politics have worked in the United States. You have the right-wing snowflakes that, say any kind of criticism of Israel is equal to anti-Semitism, and then we can't have a conversation about it. I don't know if this, bill will actually pass anything in the Senate, and it may end up, for all I know, end up kind of dead here. And that would be a great thing. We obviously don't want this to pass. It's a restriction on the First Amendment. But at the same time, as you see this kind of legislation, especially if you're, a libertarian and talking to other libertarians, and I think even most of my leftist friends generally believe in kind of the idea of free speech and open discourse, you got to talk to people and say that, hey, this bill absolutely tramples all over it. And, this whole BDS thing really isn't racist. And, there's a lot of really good people out there who support it. The last thing I'll mention is that there are Palestinians who live in the United States, and some of them, I'm guessing, have been victims of the Israeli oppression of Palestine. And so by preventing these people, from criticizing Israel and supporting BDS is really disturbing to me. It's kind of like, you're forcing them to praise or at least withhold criticism from their oppressors and the people who victimize them. In Afghanistan here, I read a story that said the Taliban would not engage in talks with the Afghan government until after a deal was announced, I guess, on the timeline of the U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. I guess I'm not surprised by this announcement from the Taliban. Hopefully they do end up talking to the Afghan government at some point and the two sides can work out some kind of deal for when the U.S. withdraws so less people are slaughtered than need be. But, that might not happen, and the U.S. leaving may just be, kind of setting up for some unfortunate massacres there, but it seems like that's going to happen no matter what, and it's going to be a really unstable situation when the U.S. leaves no matter what. So don't let this, kind of discourage you from supporting the U.S. withdrawal. If anything, it should, give a little bit of encouragement for the U.S. to make some kind of announcement here sooner rather than later. That way the Afghan government and the Taliban could start engaging in talks and hopefully wind some things down. Maybe the Afghan government needs to strategically withdraw from some cities or something like that. That way, once the U.S. leaves, the Taliban just don't come in and kill all those people who probably, don't all deserve to die. Mohammed Sahimi has a great article at the Loeb blog, and this one's linked in the show notes page, basically describing the impact of U.S. sanctions on Iran and how it's going to kill, thousands, tens of thousands of people. He really focuses on the medical end of all of this and not as much on the food end, but goes through and says that, like, hey, I have these oncologists in Iran. This is what they're saying are a result of the sanctions. I'm talking to the parents of kids with asthma and with cancer, and this is what they're going through to try to get their medicine. People are having to travel outside of Iran to get treatment, hard to get insulin, eye drops. Think about, people you may know who have ongoing health issues, chronic health issues, but are nevertheless in, a country like the United States or Iran pre-sanctions are able to get enough care to live longer, comfortable lives and, not die, but things like diabetes, MS, HIV are all things that, the medicine can't come in. Then these people are going to either have to pay high prices on the black market to get it. And then once they can't afford it anymore, will start to die, or, they may just be unable to get it and start to pass away. And it's really unfortunate. And it's really sad. Mohammed actually goes into like kind of some of the methods here of how the sanctions are working and why different companies aren't doing any more business with Iran. Because, if you ask Mike Pompeo and you say, hey, Iranian children are going to start dropping dead from cancer because of your sanctions, he's going to say, well, we didn't sanction medicines. It's like, yeah, but because you've threatened so many sanctions and you've sanctioned Iran so heavily, it's dangerous for anybody to do business with Iran. They're all afraid of running the wrath of U.S. sanctions. And, it's not like there's a good legal process to say like, hey, we're actually innocent here and we didn't violate the sanctions. We're just giving the Iranian people medicine. Nope. If some, U.S. Undersecretary of Treasury decides that you ran afoul of U.S. sanctions, well, that's your company, that's your business. We're going to come get you. He also noted that the Persian Bank that previously under the Obama maximum pressure campaign against Iran, this is prior to the 2015 JCPOA, was not sanctioned to allow room for, kind of humanitarian transactions to occur. That has now been sanctioned by the Trump administration. Turkey continues to express frustrations with the United States over Syria. They're looking at wanting a 20 to 30 kilometer safe zone inside of northern Syria east of the Euphrates River. So this would be the U.S.-backed YPG controlled territory, the Syrian Kurds there. It seems like a big ask, but Turkey continues to ask it and threaten invasion if the U.S. doesn't comply. I will say this has been going on for close to a year, if not more, so these could just be empty threats from Turkey. They're also increasingly frustrated with the situation around Manbij. Now, Manbij is a city that's actually west of the Euphrates River, and just about all the other Syrian Kurdish-held territory is east of the Euphrates River, and this was the line set by the Turkish government years ago, saying that they would attack any Kurds that cross over the Euphrates River. Now, that actually has pretty much come to pass. There was an operation by Turkey a couple of years ago called Operation Euphrates Shield, where Turkish soldiers batted some what they called moderate rebels in Syria. I don't know how moderate they are. They may be slightly more moderate than the Al-Qaeda ISIS types that control Idlib, but there's still a large force here in the northern Aleppo province that has had little skirmishes and fights with the Kurds outside of Manbij. This is something I always like to talk about too, is that the U.S. actually drove around in Humvees with big American flags hanging off the back around outside Manbij here to separate the U.S.-backed, our Kurds in Manbij from our NATO allies and their bad forces, the Syrian moderates outside of Manbij. And it's really crazy. Like, I guess at points these soldiers even took and came under fire as, they're trying to keep two what should be more or less allied with the U.S. forces apart. Anyways, the U.S. struck a deal with Turkey to withdraw from Manbij about a year ago. This hasn't come true. The Syrian Kurds apparently are still, more or less in control of Manbij. I'm not sure if the U.S. could do anything short killing them all to get them to leave at this point anyways. But Turkey is demanding that the U.S. remove these forces. And this is, just another piece in the really complex puzzle of what's going on not only in Syria, but the U.S. relationship with Turkey and, importing the Russian S-400 air defense system. All right, I'm wrap up here today with some stories on Africa. Off the coast of Libya, at least 55 migrants have died when their boat capsized. Up to 150 people have not been rescued. I think 200 people or so were actually taken on board fishing ships. So, luckily it looks like at least the majority were saved there, where so many times it's been the loss of hundreds and hundreds of lives that when these ships go down. An airstrike by the Haftar forces in Libya. This is the Eastern Libya forces led by Field Marshal Haftar. They have a fighter jet. He has an air force, even though he's not really the recognized government of Libya. But, he was able to carry out an airstrike that hit a medical facility, killing 5 doctors. Think about the impact of killing 5 doctors maybe in a war-torn country like Libya, where you probably need all the doctors you would get to, treat all the trauma that you have going on. People getting shot, people getting blown up. There's mines all over the place. But also it's a humanitarian disaster there. That's why a bunch of, hundreds of people will get on a rickety boat and try and make it across the Mediterranean Sea to Europe, because the prospects in Africa and Libya are so bleak that that's the best, course for their lives. That's, the choice they're deciding to make. In the past on the show, I've talked about, the rampant rape, There's a lot of problems now with getting clean water. Gaddafi, when he was alive, before, Obama and Hillary Clinton deposed him as ruler of Libya, which at least provided some stability to the region, built up this great man-made river under Libya to bring water from the aquifers in the south of the country up north. This has been largely damaged during the war, and so now people in Tripoli are unable to get water, and this is, becoming more of a problem for them. There's slave trade within Libya. All the different militant groups running around are absolutely brutal. They've talked about rampant sexual abuse in these prisons. And in a country like that, killing doctors is, just adding more and more to the devastation. The U.S. claims to kill an Islamist State group in Somalia. They've been making these claims all along. A couple of years ago, they said there were 80 ISIS fighters in Somalia, but they must be replenishing their ranks because they've claimed to kill well over 80 since then. In the past couple of weeks, Al-Shabaab have carried out suicide bombings in Mogadishu, the capital city of Somalia. One targeted some officials, killing 6. Another one, I think, was more of a civilian target and killed 17. In Niger, you had Shiite protest groups that came and took to the streets. 20 were killed by government forces and then that group was banned by the Nigerian government. All right, everybody, short show today, but as I said, I'm very busy this summer. I'm, working with antiwar.com. I just got engaged, so a lot of stuff, both professional and personal going on. It's all exciting, It's one of the greatest times I've ever had, but that does mean that some of the shows are going to be on the shorter side. I hope that's okay with everyone. I am keeping up with the news, so I'll probably have a great one for you on Friday. Enjoy the nice summer days here, everyone.